जी स्टार्ट करें.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Good evening to one and all present here. Good evening, Shekhar sir. Today we have gathered here to commemorate the 64th death anniversary of Dr. Bhimrao Ambedkar. For this session, we have the very learned and eminent senior advocate, Mr. Shekhar Nafare, along with us. So, a brief introduction of Sir. Sir, after completing law from Government Law College, Bombay, started his law practice in the year in 1974. Initially, he worked for Mr. B.N. Sri Krishna, who subsequently became the judge of Bombay High Court and subsequently of the Supreme Court of India. Mr. Nafade was practicing mainly on original side of Bombay High Court. As a part-timer, he taught law of evidence, administrative law, and public international law in Government Law College from the year 1976 to 1979. He has been regularly appearing in Supreme Court since 1979. Mr. Shekhar Nafade was designated as a senior advocate by Bombay High Court in the year 1998. He recently appeared in the case popularly known as the Arunachal Assembly case. It involved interpretation of Articles 163, 153 to 167, 168 to 212, 377, etc. of the Indian Constitution. Sir, over the years has appeared on many famous cases, and without much ado, I would hand over the proceedings to Sir. If you have any questions, please write it down in the chat box. I will take it up with Sir later on after he finishes giving his speech and thoughts on today's talk. Thank you.
Can I start?
Yes, sir.
First of all, let me thank Think India for inviting me to address this gathering. I always had great admiration for Dr. Ambedkar. He was a giant intellectual. Let me begin by quoting his favorite quotes. That will give us an idea as to what Dr. Ambedkar was. One is a quote from Buddha. As you all know, ultimately he embraced Buddhism. And the other is a quote from a well-known philosopher. First is, know truth as truth, and know untruth as untruth. Buddha. Second is equally important. That gives a clue to his mental frame. He that will not reason is a bigot. He that cannot reason is a fool. And he that dare not reason is a slave. This is the message of Baba Sahib. He passed away many, many years ago. But look at the impact and the imprint that he has made on the Indian body politic. There is a reason for this. First of all, we must understand who Dr. Ambedkar was. That he was associated with drafting of India's constitution. Probably most of us know this aspect of Dr. Ambedkar. But he was much more than that. Let me begin with he was born in a scheduled caste community. Intellectual capabilities, they're superb. His experiences in life and his struggle to imbibe modern education clearly shows man's determination. against all prejudices, against all odds, against all kinds of problems, including problem of poverty. He did his graduation in BA from Bombay's Elphinstone College. Later on, with the support of Maharaja of Kolhapur, Shahu Maharaj, and then subsequently the Maharaja of Baroda, he could take his education in England and in America. In England, he obtained MA degree and doctorate from London School of Economics. From Columbia University, he obtained another doctorate in the year 1927. And you will be surprised to note that his doctorate, both his doctorates are in the Faculty of Economics. Dr. Ambedkar was a great thinker as far as economic affairs are concerned. He was also bar at law. He had also obtained a degree, a MSc degree in science. He was a great student of anthropology and ethnology. These are facets which are not known to people. I often wonder, when did he get time to pursue this? He was determined because of his exposure to the modern world. He was clearly of the view that the social upliftment of the depressed class is possible only through education and nothing else. When I take up his contribution to the evolution of Indian thought, I will indicate to you to what extent he studied anthropology and ethnology. Now, before I turn to some other topic, let me tell you, his contribution to the evolution of economic thought in this country, which very few people know. And unfortunately, the political activists, even from his political stream, have not emphasized these aspects of his life. You will be surprised to note that the Reserve Bank of India, which came into existence in the year 1934, as a result of Royal Finance Commission on Currency and Finance, 1927. It is also known as, that commission is also known as the, by another name, I forget that other name. As a result of his representation, on the basis of his thesis, which is known as the problem of Indian currency, the origin and solution. That commission is also known as Hilton-Young Commission, 1927. His thesis, which was his doctoral thesis of 1923, which he presented in a slightly modified form to that Royal Commission on Finance and Indian Currency, which led to the establishment of Reserve Bank of India by the Reserve Bank of India Act 1932. A fact which is, I don't know why this is not brought into public domain even by those following it. Now let me give you another glimpse of his intellectual heights. He has written number of essays. He has written number of articles. They are too numerous to be quoted. But some of his most important works, I must bring it to your notice. Otherwise, I'll be failing in my duty. The first, administration and finance of East India Company. It's an economic thesis. The evolution of provincial finance in British India. Another economic thesis. The problem of rupee, its origin and solution, which I already indicated, 1923. Then I come to his contribution to the development of thought with regard to the social affairs in this country. And that is a paper which he presented in 1916 in the Columbia University. Mark the year, 1916. He was born in 1891, 14th April 1891. How old was he? Just 25. And his paper was on castes in India. It's a masterly analysis of the genesis, the mechanism, and the problems created by the castes in India. I do not think any other Indian of those days or any of his contemporaries, perhaps some two exceptions which I will indicate, have ever thought of an anthropological or ethnological study of castes in India. That is Dr. Ambedkar. He was not a street agitator. He was an intellectual. His was an intellectual challenge to his contemporaries and to his peers. Therefore, when he developed his thesis of the genesis and the mechanism of castes in India, it was based on deep study of anthropology and ethnology. He was not merely a person who would only pose a problem. He had an answer also. Whether we agree with him or not is another issue. As I said, that only two of his contemporaries, if I call them as contemporaries, have studied this aspect of the problem. One is the late Dr. Amarul Lohia, whose famous book on the class and caste in India, and Iravati Karve, another great anthropologist, her work on kinship organization in India. Of late, there is a lot of work which has been done by the Indians. But in those days, 1916, perhaps Dr. Ambedkar was the only person apart from Dr. Ketkar. Dr. Ketkar was senior to him, and Dr. Ketkar also had made some study from an anthropological point of view of the caste system in India. Now, he gives the solution in his famous essay or his famous book. I'll come to that. That is Annihilation of Caste System in India. I'll take it up a little later. Now, what was his role in public affairs of this country? I have already indicated his role as a thinker on economic affairs of this country. But there is one dimension of his personality which is worth noting. He was a socialist by conviction. But his convictions were not vitiated by any orthodoxy. He rejected the Marxist approach to economic affairs, which I will indicate when I take up the other aspects of his personality. So his role as an economic thinker is little known in this country. His concept was, what he wanted was, which unfortunately did not fructify, because the political forces then operating in the body politic of India were opposed to his ideas. He was the first person, and let me assure you, he was not influenced by Marxist ideology. He was against the theory of communism. He contemplated that the agriculture should be a state monopoly. And he contemplated a collectivized cultivation of agricultural land. In the industrial sector also, he has concepts of socialism, not the socialism borrowed from Soviet Russia or from other countries. He had his own version. The limited time space that we have today, it's not possible for me to go into it. But I must briefly indicate why he wanted the state socialism as far as agriculture totally was, that the masses of people are going hungry. There is a problem of fragmentation. The farmers are poor. They don't have the adequate means to adopt modern technology and develop agriculture on scientific lines. That is possible only through an effective intervention by the state. This is a brief outlook of Dr. Ambedkar as far as economic affairs are concerned. In fact, he had submitted a paper on that subject when the Constitution of India was on the anvil. Be that as it may. His another contribution as an individual. He had submitted a detailed representation on behalf of his political party, which was then known as Scheduled Caste Federation Party, which ultimately became Republic Party of India. He had submitted a representation on behalf of his party to the Subcommittee on Fundamental Rights, constituted by the Constituent Assembly. If you study that representation minutely, with reference to the relationship between the state and the minorities, as regards fundamental rights, it was a mini constitution which was framed by Dr. Ambedkar. And you will find that a lot of that representation is reflected in the Constitution of India that finally emerged on 26th of November 1949 and came into force on 26th January 1950. I will take up first his contribution to the development of the constitutional law, constitution, and constitutional practices. Why was he chosen? I often wonder. The people then in power were people like Jawaharlal Nehru, who had his education in England, Dr. Rajendra Prasad, another giant intellectually. Then he had from the south so many people. But why was he chosen? In fact, if you see that he was just one of the few members from his party. He was chosen because amongst his contemporaries who were members of the Constituent Assembly, he was probably the only one who was exposed to international thoughts. He was the only one who had a global exposure. He knew what was from close quarters, what was happening in America, what was happening in Europe, what was happening in Japan, what is the Irish struggle, what is the problem in Ireland because of his stay abroad. He had a live contact with the new social developments that were sweeping across America and England and Europe and Japan. Now, what do we find? This is little known. That substantial part of Constitution as it emerged finally from the Constituent Assembly is a reflection of the American thought as far as fundamental rights are concerned, the parliamentary model as far as England is concerned, and concept of independent judiciary and the rights of minorities. All this has come from Dr. Ambedkar's perception of what is fair, just, and equitable. You see, he was the chairman of the drafting committee. But one great quality of Dr. Ambedkar was, which is reflected from his favorite quote, "He that will not reason is a bigot." If you see his intervention in the Constituent Assembly debates or his speeches in the Constituent Assembly debates, whenever he introduced any particular article of the Constitution or any amendment thereto, or when he was responding to proposed amendments, the hallmark of his contribution is his reason. He was willing to reason, he was willing to debate, he was willing to exchange ideas. And one classic example that I can give you is that initially Dr. Ambedkar was not in favor of the concept of a removable executive. What does that mean? It means that the party in power or the Prime Minister or the Council of Ministers in power is subject to the vote of confidence of the Parliament. And if the Council of Ministers lose the confidence of the House, they go out. He was thinking about an irremovable political executive, like the American model. But through a debate and consensus and reason, ultimately he agreed to adopt the Westminster model of parliamentary democracy. I am indicating this to you because Ambedkar was a much misunderstood man in his own lifetime. And the tragedy of that man is that he is little understood after his death. Now he was willing to reason out, and therefore he was not dogmatic. He knew that the affairs of a country of the size of India, with such diversity, in terms of language, in terms of cultures, in terms of caste, in terms of religion, race, and what have you, that you have to evolve consensus. He was equally pragmatic. He had his firm views, but he was also willing to arrive at consensus. That does not mean that he was pliable. No. So this great quality of a great man, that open to reason. That is why when I started paying my tributes to him, I quoted his favorite quote: "He who will not reason is a bigot." This is relevant to the contemporary India. You may and I may have differences, but the day we stop reasoning, we become bigots. Now let's take another aspect of the Constitution, the federal structure. This was a fiercely debated issue. Ambedkar was clearly in favor of a strong center. And he had a reason. His reason was that India is a country with a population which has vast differences in terms of their social background, their cultural background, their languages, their caste, their religion, race, etc. And to keep this kind of political structure unified, it is necessary that we have a strong center. And therefore, if you see, for example, Article 246 and Articles 254 as they now stand, they make out a case of the primacy of the federal law. Now, you all know, I think most of you are law students, that the executive power of the central government is coextensive with its legislative power. So also the executive power of the state governments is coextensive with its legislative power. And therefore making the federal law of prime importance, Ambedkar could conceive a constitution with a strong center, because there was a possibility in the early days of India's independence of fissiparous tendencies gaining political momentum. But at the same time, he was conscious of the fact that a country of this size with such differences in the population, we cannot have a unitary form of government. We need to have a flexible federal structure. In fact, there are jurists like Professor Veer who consider Indian constitution not a purely federal, but a quasi-federal constitution. Be that as it may. But he was conscious of the fact that the state governments need to have some kind of constitutional setup, some place in the constitutional setup. They must have legislative powers to regulate the affairs which are allotted to them in the scheme of distribution of legislative power. So we have the 7th schedule, we have the union list, we have the state list, and we have the concurrent list. Now, therefore, you will see that the federal structure conceived by Dr. Ambedkar is a flexible one. And one important aspect which is relevant, that he tried to balance the requirement of a strong central government with the democratic aspirations of the people of a given state or of a given region. A constitution is a guarantee to ensure that the federal structure remains intact. So, the first requirement is that if the constitution is to be amended, and if it affects the rights of the states, state governments or state legislatures, then any such amendment will require ratification by at least half the state legislative bodies. That's the proviso to Article 368. Another, that not only the amendments which affect the states directly, but even indirectly, or even not affecting directly or indirectly, in the amendment of the constitution, the Rajya Sabha plays an equally important role. That 2/3 majority is also required for a constitutional amendment in Rajya Sabha also. And the Rajya Sabha consists of representatives of the state legislative bodies. So therefore, it's a very unique combination that the Rajya Sabha is a part of the federal legislative body, but an effective representation of the states. I think this is only due to the genius of Dr. Ambedkar that we could evolve a federal structure with this kind of flexibility, and at the same time, we could maintain a strong central government. Then we come to fundamental rights. Now we all know that this is taken virtually from the amendments to the American Constitution, the Bill of Rights as is known. But Dr. Ambedkar was not satisfied only with introduction a chapter or a part on fundamental rights. He was of the view that you cannot have effective implementation of fundamental rights unless there is an effective judicial remedy. And that is why you have Article 32. A man staying in a remote village, if he is subjected to any kind of undeserved discrimination, can write now a letter to the Supreme Court of India that his rights under Article 32 are violated, that his fundamental rights are violated. Please entertain my petition under Article. Can you conceive? In 1950, such an idea. It's a revolution in the judicial administration that a smallest man against a mighty state can approach directly the Supreme Court of India under Article. What could be a more judicial revolution than this? In this context, I must also hasten to add that though Dr. Ambedkar was conscious of importance of fundamental rights to regulate the relationship between the government and the citizens, he was equally aware and conscious of the fact that there can't be absolute rights. When you live in a society, when you live in an organized state based on the rule of law, you must accept certain restrictions. And therefore, there is a wonderful combination in Article 19 of fundamental rights and reasonable restrictions on them. Against a nice balance struck between the requirement of the state to maintain public order, to maintain law and order, to bring about socio-economic development, so on and so forth. Article 17, which abolishes untouchability. There is a constitutional mandate. Let's see, untouchability, a social evil that prevailed in this country for centuries and for perhaps thousands of years, with a stroke of pen, it is abolished. If at all, I remember Dr. Ambedkar, for I remember him of insertion of Article 17. Of course, some people have raised issues that Article 17, how do you implement? That's another issue. But you must remember that a social change starts first with the thought. Any social reform or any revolution, either in political arena, economic arena, or social or cultural arena, begins with thought. It is man's capacity to vision, to see a vision, that leads him to action. And therefore, Article 17 was Ambedkar's dream, which all of us must strive to achieve in our own lifetime. There is another important thought which Dr. Ambedkar contributed to the development of constitutional law in this country. This relates to his social philosophy. This relates to his economic philosophy. As I indicated earlier, that he wanted the state monopoly in agriculture, but that could not be achieved. He was of the view that a mere political democracy is not enough. It must be based on social democracy. And what is his concept of social democracy? Simple. According to him, social democracy means a way of life which recognizes liberty, equality, and fraternity. Mark the last word, the fraternity. Now, when does fraternity come? Equality can be brought about by law. Liberty can be brought about by law. Because these are political, legal tools. But can you bring about fraternity? Even if you make a law requiring all of us to declare that we are all brothers and sisters, how do you implement it? So that is why he says rightly that social democracy is not something which is brought about by law, but is brought about by a recognition at a social level of fraternity. The day we feel that we Indians are brothers and sisters, in a true sense, then only we achieve Dr. Ambedkar's vision of liberty, equality, and fraternity. Now, in order to give an impetus to this concept of liberty, equality, and fraternity, we have the part 4 in the Constitution, that is the directive principles of the state policy. That is the compromise that Dr. Ambedkar arrived at. His concept of socialism was not acceptable. So he agreed to introduce the principles, that is directive principles of the state policy. If you read each and every article in that part, what does it aim at? It aims at social democracy. That is Dr. Ambedkar. That he kept the part 4 as the guiding star of all economic, political, and social policies that the government of India or the state government should pursue. Look at its impact. Initially, people thought that this is a toothless provision in the Constitution. But the constitutional law development in this country clearly nullifies such perception. Every legislation which had some impact on the vested interest was challenged in this country, especially if it affected the vested economic and social interest. And every such legislation, barring a few exceptions here and there, they were all upheld by the Supreme Court on the basis of the directive principles of the state policy. That when you judge the reasonableness of law, which restricts your fundamental rights or which places some restriction, the reasonableness of that law has to be judged on the basis of the principles contained in part 4, that is the directive principles of. That is Dr. Ambedkar's contribution. A directive principles of the state policy is nothing but a beginning of a social revolution in this country, in my view. Perhaps I may have to exceed my time. Is that okay? Hello?
Yes, sir. No problem, sir.
Yes, sir, no problem.
A bit I will try to. Now we come to a very interesting issue of, I dealt with the federal structure. The first problem that we had after independence was the formation of linguistic states. It started with Andhra Pradesh, and probably it has ended with Andhra Pradesh. Hopefully. It was 1952 or early 1950s, I forget the exact year. The Madras presidency or the Madras state was a large state which combined territories of present Andhra and Telangana, part of Kerala, part of Karnataka. There was an agitation. And in those days, we had Bihar, which was based on linguistic. We had UP, which was linguistic. We had Bengal, which was linguistic. We had Assam, which was linguistic. In the early era of the British rule, they were not very keen on forming linguistic states. Bihar, Uttar Pradesh, Bengal, Assam happened to be by accident. The reason was that Britishers were afraid that if you form linguistic states, there would be a greater political, social, and cultural cohesion amongst the people, and they would unite to fight against the British Empire. But over the years, the Britishers also realized, which is reflected in the Government of India Act 1935, that the formation of linguistic states perhaps would lead to better administration. So after independence, this was the first issue. Dr. Ambedkar had apprehensions about formation of linguistic states, but he was not opposed to it. He had a reason. He thought that formation of linguistic states would perhaps lead to a more cohesive population, and therefore the administrative affairs can be done in a better way. And the government of the people can be brought near the people. This is what a democrat, true democrat he was. But he was equally apprehensive. And let me tell you his two serious apprehensions, which in my respectful view, we have not been able to address even now. His one apprehension was that the larger the linguistic states, there is a possibility of a strong social group, maybe in the form of a caste, would dominate. And the other groups and other castes would become subordinate. Can we say that these fears were liars? Or can we say that his hopes were dupes, as the poet says? The second issue, which is equally important and which is little known, that why was he apprehensive? The apprehension was that will it lead to too much of regionalism? Will it create subnationalism? Will it give fillip to the Fissiparist tendencies? But in order to overcome this, because as I said earlier, that he was not only a person who could tell you the problem, the great thinker that he was equally concerned with the solution. And he offered two solutions to control extreme regionalism. He said that no matter the states are formed on linguistic basis, the official language of all state governments will be same as the official language of the central. See how far-sighted he was. In fact, he went to the extent of saying, which perhaps people from South may not like even now, that we should have Hindi as the common official language in the Devanagari script. But again, he agreed with the compromise, and therefore, the official language policy as is contained in the constitution is only a directive, not a mandatory provision that at some time we should have. But in the interregnum, we should continue with English as the official language. Far-sighted man. And the second solution which he offered to prevent emergence of a socially powerful caste dominating the affairs of the state governments, he said, make the states smaller in size. He worked it out on the basis of statistics. He said the smaller is the size of the state, the greater is the chance of not one group dominating the political affairs of that. So that is Dr. Ambedkar. He was not only a person who raised the problem, but he was a person who could offer a solution. Whether we agree with the solution that he proposed or not is another issue. So that is the hallmark of a true thinker, a great thinker, that he not only poses a problem, but he also offers a solution. Now, there are several other aspects of the Constitution which in this, but these are the important aspects. Now, let me go to briefly to his contribution to the evolution of thoughts on social issues and cultural issues. In 1916, when Ambedkar was a student in Columbia University, at the age of 25, he got his doctorate from Columbia University in 1927. And he got another doctorate from Columbia University in 1952. That is LLD, doctorate in law, because of his contribution to the framing of the India's Constitution. A unique example in the history of Columbia University, that they recognized his work in India. Anyway, in the year 1916, he presented in this seminar on anthropology. I indicated to you earlier that he was a keen student of anthropology and ethnology. What was his paper? His paper was about the formation of castes in India. The time at my disposal is limited, but I'll be failing in my duty if I don't indicate the broad features of his thinking. He raises a very interesting issue which has not been addressed so far, to my knowledge at least, limited as it is. That what is the genesis or the origin of caste system in India? How it originated? As a student of anthropology and ethnology, Dr. Ambedkar goes to the migration of people into India. What is our racial stock? That is the first thing that is studied. Our racial stock consists of Aryans, which is a well-known thing, the Dravidians, Mongolians, and little known Scythians. Now, he goes on to say that these communities or races, tribes, they came to India in a when they were in a low cultural form. And because of constant contact and intermingling and a constant social intercourse over centuries, the mingling started. Though originally they had their own distinctive cultures, languages, customs, even concepts of religious concepts, they evolved a culture, some kind of unity in culture. It's a long process which took centuries. But the question still, which kept on bothering him is that this is not a phenomenon which is confined only to India. Probably every country had its own share of migrations, even as late as America or Australia. People have migrated from different parts of the world. So why only in India we have a caste? And what is a caste? Now the sociologist, anthropologist, or ethnologist of his era, his contemporaries, when I say his contemporaries means in the early 20th century. The first thing he did was to study the works of great scholars, and I'll briefly indicate who are the scholars whose works he studied. One was Mr. Senart. He was a French scholar who had studied the problem of caste in India. The next was Nestfield, a Britisher. Another was one H. Risley. And the last was Dr. Chetkar, the Indian. He studied their works. To some extent, he agrees with them, with their scholarship, with their thinking. But he does not accept them totally blindly. Whole of Dr. Ambedkar's life is informed by his capacity to reason. And he ultimately comes out with his own theory, which I will try to indicate to you as briefly as possible. There were two principal social trends. One is what is known as endogamy, and the other is exogamy. I'll briefly explain what those concepts are. Endogamy means a marriage only within a particular class. Exogamy means a marriage outside a particular class. Now, all the anthropologists, ethnologists, and sociologists, they could only answer the perpetuation of the caste system. But they could not answer the question as to how the castes were formed. I think, subject to correction from any quarters, Dr. Ambedkar is the first person, because of his phenomenal background in different social disciplines. History, he was a keen student of history. He was an anthropologist. He studied ethnology. He studied science. He had a scientific background. And that's the hallmark of his ability to reason out any proposition. His understanding of social affairs, he came out with an answer. And see how he beautifully explains the endogamy and exogamy with reference to Indian context. He agrees with all the scholars of that era that the caste is perpetuated by endogamy. That is, no marriage outside the caste, which you find.
Oh, yes, sir. You. Yes, sir.
Sorry, I was disconnected for a while. Now,
No
I will
problem.
briefly indicate. Why in India the following customs emerged. That is, the sati, enforced widowhood, and child marriages. The deep study that Dr. Ambedkar made required him to come to the conclusion that this is because of the practice of endogamy. Now, I don't want to go deep into this subject because it's a very complex study of several social, economic, cultural, religious aspects. Now, how the caste system emerged? Ambedkar's analysis gives a clue. He says all over the world, the society always consisted of classes. Some were more powerful than the others. The power of classes might have come from intellectual powers, might have come from economic powers, or might have come from social status. So Dr. Ambedkar says that those who were powerful economically, politically, socially, they enclosed themselves into a class and they developed the principle of endogamy. And therefore, the membership of that class was confined only to those who married within that class and who were born within that class. So in course of time, this class became a caste. And this was imitated by people who were less powerful. So therefore, the social gradation started. Ambedkar says that you cannot look at the caste problem in India in isolation. There is a graded structure, socially graded structure of caste. And in that graded structure, every class which was above always thought that those below it should not come to its level. And this kind of inequality and this kind of social differentiation and this kind of graded social structure became perpetuated, got perpetuated. This is in short the thesis developed by Dr. Ambedkar. Now, what is the solution? Dr. Ambedkar's quarrel with his contemporaries can be classified into categories. His quarrel was with those who first believed that let's have political freedom first. And he also had his own differences with the Marxists or socialists as they were then known. His contention was that political democracy is of no consequence unless we have social democracy. A mere political democracy will only be a formal democracy with no real content, both in terms of social values and economic values and cultural values. So therefore, a political democracy bereft of these social, economic and cultural values is no democracy, no real democracy. That is why he had great differences with the leaders of the Congress party in that era, who propounded that let's have first political democracy, let's first drive out the British imperialists and then we'll put our house in order. Ambedkar was deeply apprehensive about it. He always thought that by driving out the British imperialists, we may have the domination of a new class, maybe of Indian origin. His differences with the socialists were he refused to accept the basic thesis of Marxism. He said that economic determinism is not the clue. He says economic power is not an answer. That unless a social democracy is established and we truly establish a regime based on liberty, equality, and fraternity, even economic parity, even economic equality is not possible. He was clearly of the view that unless the social equality and the principle of fraternity and the feeling of brotherhood is established in the Indian body politic, it is not possible to have economic equality. You will once again have a domination by one group or the other. Therefore, he rejects the idea of political.
Yes, sir.
Again, I got disconnected. Sorry, there is some problem at my end with the power. Am I
No
audible
problem,
now?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. You are.
Yeah. Now, he gives, it was not his ipse dixit. He makes that thesis on the basis of a historical data obtaining in India. He refers to the era of Chandragupta. He says the political reforms in Chandragupta's regime were preceded by social reforms brought about by Buddha. Then he refers to Guru Nanak. Amongst the Sikhs, the political reforms took place because they were preceded by social reforms brought about by Guru Nanak. Then he refers to the new political revolution in Maharashtra brought about by Shivaji Maharaj, because that was preceded by the social reforms brought about by the saints of Maharashtra. So the basic thesis of Dr. Ambedkar is that unless there are social reforms and we truly establish a regime based on liberty, equality, and fraternity, a mere political democracy is of no consequence. Now, having analyzed, but let me tell you a very interesting anecdote. When he wrote his thesis, Annihilation of Caste in India, he contemplated a casteless and a classless society in India. This His book has a very interesting history, which I will briefly narrate. There was an organization in Lahore which was named as, which was known as the Jat Todak Mandal. Jat Todak Mandal. And this was in 1935. Now they invited Dr. Ambedkar to deliver the presidential address in their conference. But they wanted to make sure that his ideas are not too revolutionary for them to culp. So they requested him, you first send a synopsis of your presidential address. Dr. Ambedkar was reluctant to do so because he valued the freedom of thought. But ultimately he was persuaded. So when they read his thesis of annihilation of caste, they got too frightened and they cancelled. So Jat Todak Mandal itself got broken. But that was the occasion for Dr. Ambedkar to write his famous thesis known as Annihilation of Caste in India. This was written in 1936. To be precise, May 1936. Now, what does he indicate? He says that unless the state adopts a policy of intercaste marriages and we put an end to endogamy, and at the same time we take measures to bring about upliftment of socially depressed classes, you cannot have a social democracy. And if you can't have a social democracy, there will be no economic democracy and there will be no political democracy in the true sense of it. Dr. Ambedkar also gave an example of how political democracy can be hijacked by powerful people. He cites the example of the Roman Constitution. Those of you who are familiar with the history of Europe know that between the plebeians and patricians, there was a tug of war for many, many years. And the plebeians ultimately got representation in the legislative bodies. But there was a catch that no plebeian can assume an office unless the oracle of Delphi, which was the authority of the goddess, accepted him as a fit person to act as the representative of the plebeians. And it was found as a historical experience that any plebeian who was of strong-minded, who had a mind of his own, the oracle of Delphi never approved his candidature. And the so-called oracle of Delphi always approved such plebeian candidates who could be easily influenced by the patrician. So the political democracy in Rome was no real democracy. So Ambedkar's work is not his ipse dixit. It is based on, there are several other historical studies that he has made, especially in Prussia, Ireland, Rome, and several other parts of the world. And of course, the history of India, which I indicated, Guru Nanak, Chandragupta, and last but not the least, Shivaji Maharaj in Maharashtra. So the long and short is that message of Dr. Ambedkar is that no democracy in a true sense is possible unless it has its all the elements at social level, at economic level, at cultural level, and also at political. In my respectful view, submission, that we have so far achieved only political democracy, and to some extent, we have made progress towards the economic and social aspects, but we are still far away from our destiny, that is to establish a regime truly based on eternal principles of liberty, equality, and fraternity. This is the message which Dr. Ambedkar conveyed to the country. To the best of my ability, I have placed before you Dr. Ambedkar's views as objectively as possible. It's not necessary that I totally agree with him on everything that I have presented before you. But as he rightly says, that anyone who is not willing to reason is a bigot. And I don't want to follow bigotry. I am willing to reason and debate with anyone who has views other than held by me. I must again thank you all for inviting me. Share my not really my views, but my perception of Dr. Ambedkar's contribution to the development of thought in this country. Thank you very much again.
Thank you, sir. Thank you very much. Thank you, Shekhar Rafare sir, for giving us a very insightful look into the life of Dr. B.R. Ambedkar and what he thought about society and law in general. And thank you again for sparing your valuable time with us. We hope that our interns and all the participants which had gathered here came to a very conclusive knowledge about what Ambedkar ji actually wanted. Thank you again, and thank you, sir. Thank you.